Hello you guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today we are doing my worst books of 2019. So I wasn't initially going to give a disclaimer or preface this video, but I have already filmed this video before, and in doing that I learned that I need to do a disclaimer. And it's not because I'm worried that people are going to get mad at me for trashing their favorite book, because those people are going to do that anyways. They are going to dislike this video regardless, and I would just like to preface that disliking my video is the exact same as liking it. It gives me the exact same engagement. It works exactly the same. So there you go. Keep on supporting my channel. Thank you. This disclaimer is more for the average viewer or the viewers that this may be their first video of mine that you are watching. I don't want to put people off because I have found that I get extremely passionate when I'm talking about things, whether that be things that I extremely love or things that I extremely hate. And thankfully in this video, only like my top 5 are books that I have super strong opinions about. But regardless, because I am having to film this because I was looking back and I was going to edit my original video and I just didn't like how I came off, I am always very open-minded. I don't really mind how I come off across the camera, but I want to try my best to not be misunderstood. Just because I get particularly heated or very passionate, again, does not mean it's not a slander to you if you liked this book. It's just me and my big fiery energy, and I just can't help but get a little crazy sometimes. Putting it out there, I might get a little angry, but that's just because I get caught up in the moment and books just make me feel things. But other than that, I trust that we can all be mature enough to have different opinions and respect each other's opinions. So let's get into probably going to be my most popular video of the year. At number 10, we have The Hazel Wood by Melissa Albert. This was the first book pick for my book club that I host with Carly's Books, and that is the Cover Whores book club. We chose this because it does have a stunning cover, but it is not as stunning on the inside, unfortunately. The first half is actually not that bad. We are following this descendant of this really famous fairy tale author, but her mother didn't want her to read those stories. She kind of distanced herself from her own mother, so our granddaughter, our main character, doesn't really know these fairy tales. She's never really met her grandma, but all of a sudden when she comes across this copy of her grandmother's old fairy tales, strange and mysterious circumstances start to arise, and her mother goes missing, and she has to travel to the Hazel Wood, which is where her grandmother resides, in order to find out what's going on. The synopsis is extremely intriguing and very promising. The first half of the book actually is not too bad. It's kind of a road trip, mysterious kind of story of our main character traveling to the Hazelwood, but then the second half is her going through the Hazelwood, and these two parts of the story felt completely different. The pacing was extremely off, and overall it just kind of felt like a chaotic mess to me. And I know this is a very common criticism. A lot of people say very similar things. I thought I was going to feel differently because I went into the book with kind of low expectations, but it turns out booktube was right and I did not enjoy this book at all, which is why it is on the list. At number 9, we have Shadow Frost by Coco Ma. Now, I feel kind of bad about this one because it is a debut and I did receive an art copy of this, but this just felt like it was published 10 years too late. I was reading the author's bio and the biography for this book, and it says that the author wrote this when she was a teenager, which I do just want to preface that that is a huge accomplishment, and I could never have the determination that it takes to write write a novel, let alone write one at 16, 17, whenever the age exactly that she wrote this. But similarly to Throne of Glass, which is the exact same circumstances with Sarah J. Maas, it definitely reads like a teenager wrote it. It is just filled with very amateur writing and so clearly defined by tropes and things that you've just seen over and over and over again. I've just read these tropes before. It's about a girl who has all of these abilities and is the first one to be able to control all of the elements, and she has to save her kingdom from this formidable evil, and she goes on this quest with a bunch of characters. It was really boring to me. There was just nothing new that it brought to the table. The dialogue was extremely cringy, so cheesy. It made me cringe the entire time I was reading it. Just needed so much more polishing and so many more drafts, but that didn't seem to be the case when I read this book. Now at number 8 we have Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson. This was the most boring murder mystery plot that I have ever read in my life. Granted, I don't read a lot of mystery novels, but I feel like that gives mystery books even more of an advantage because I am such a newbie to the genre, but this was just so incredibly boring and cheesy and not what I was expecting whatsoever. Truly Devious is a dual timeline story where we are following two different murders, one in the early 20th century at this very prestigious boarding school, and then another one in present day where we are following our main character who is extremely interested in true crime, and she goes to the same boarding school in an effort to solve the crime that happened years ago. So the fact that this book contained two murder mysteries and it still managed to bore me to death definitely says something. Maybe it was because I kind of went into a bit higher of expectations because of how much the community seems to love this book, but it was just such a disappointment to me. This boarding school is supposed to be very, like I said, very prestigious. It accepts only 10 to 20 kids every year, and they are supposed to be the best of whatever they intend to study. Despite that, all of the students were incredibly boring. I mean, one of them was a YouTuber, and another one was just this girl who just kept talking about her trips to Paris. Like, why are you even here? It ended in a cliffhanger, and I understand that this is a trilogy, but first of all, why does a mystery story have to have 3 books in a trilogy? Like, that to me just seems lazy writing in and of itself. Similarly to Shadowfrost, the dialogue was so cheesy, and it's just another instance of adults clearly writing teenagers, and you can just tell right off the bat because that's not how teenagers talk, and that has to be one of my personal biggest pet peeves when I'm reading. I hate when authors try to write YA, but then they don't take the time into actually writing teenagers in a realistic and proper way. They just write them very campy and very cheesy. It just does not work for me. I don't enjoy it at all. So disappointed that I wasted all of my time. Now we have Enchantée by Gita Trelease at number 7. Oh my goodness, this book. So this book was described or pitched as like a French Revolution, Texas Hold'em kind of book where we follow our main character who is kind of the caretaker for her siblings. She has a younger sister and an older brother, and she is able to turn scraps of metal into coins, so that is kind of how they make their living. But one day her brother actually steals all of their money, so she comes up with this plan to transform herself into a duchess using this very powerful magic, and she is going to use this disguise in order to steal from the palace. Now that synopsis made it to my most anticipated reads of 2019. I was so excited for this book because it sounded absolutely incredible. Oh, how disappointed I was. First of all, it was way more gambling heavy than it was magic heavy, and I found the gambling aspect, if the author wanted to go that route and go heavily like Texas Hold'em, Vegas baby all the way, I feel like she could have made the games more interesting, described the games more, maybe had these intense relationships between people trying to call each other's bluffs and try to find each other's weaknesses, things like that. Like, if she wanted to go heavily into the gambling route, I feel like that could have worked if she put emphasis on that rather than just focus on the games as just a social gathering. And at that point, I'm just bored, because in a book centered around the eve of the revolution, we are surrounded by the worst kinds of aristocrats possible. And by the end of the book, we are expected as readers to feel for the aristocrats. And I'm sorry, you're gonna write a book during the eve of the revolution. You're gonna write a book during that time period, and you're gonna try to sympathize with the rich people? No, not in this house. And minor spoilers, but I wouldn't be worried about them too much. The main character herself becomes an aristocrat at the end. Like, she becomes one of these rich upper class. She's able to purchase a house in the very rich neighborhood next to the palace. This book has a sequel. Is the sequel just going to be the main character getting her head chopped off? Because that's all I can think that happens. Or even worse, is it going to be a book centered around the French Revolution with an aristocrat as the main character? Someone contact this publisher, because we don't want this at all. At number 6, we have City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. Now, this is a very popular novel. I know a lot of people really love this book, and a lot of my issues for this book stem from things that isn't necessarily my place to, not even necessarily, it isn't my place to comment on. So for this, before I get into my thoughts and kind of go over why this book is on my worst books of 2019 list, I strongly encourage you guys to check out the link below to Chima's review on Goodreads, because me and her match 100% on our feelings towards this book, and she herself is a Muslim reviewer, so I trust her opinions, I trust her thoughts on this book, as should all of you. So definitely go and check out her review and take my thoughts with a grain of salt. Go check out her review. She's great. My favorite reviewer on Goodreads, and this is actually how I found her, and I just adore her. City of Brass is a Middle Eastern inspired fantasy where we are following our main character Nari, and she gets dragged into this journey trying to figure out her lineage after she gets involved with a jinn, and they together go to the City of Brass in order to figure out more about who she is, what she is, and how her existence is going to shape the world. First, right off the bat, the pacing for this book is atrocious. I understand that adult fantasy is slow. That's not a problem for me. I am okay with a book being slow because it gives the necessary development and it makes you invested in the story. But it was more the pacing and how the book was organized. I hated that it took so long for us to even get to the city which the book is named after. I feel like it was dragged on so much. I really feel like the first 300 pages is so hard to get through, and if it's really that hard to get through, it kind of ruins your enjoyment for the rest of the book. At least that's how it happened for me personally. The second thing that really turned me off to this book, and this book did make me realize this about myself and my reading taste, is every single character in this book, minus Nari, which she's okay, were absolutely horrible racist bigots. And my thing is this world that takes place, this fantasy world, is made up of hundreds and thousands of species. However, despite that, every single one of the species hate each other and are so incredibly racist and intolerant to each other, which, okay, that could be translated to today's world. But I just don't like to see that in a fantasy world, and this is where personal preference comes into play. I just need to be able to root for at least one character. That doesn't mean they have to be a good character. They don't have to be 100% good or even morally gray, but I just have to be invested in somebody, and this book just had me surrounded by characters that I hated, that were constant assholes towards each other, that had zero character development from at least this book. For a book to have such a slow plot, I at least need to be invested in the characters. So when the characters suck and the plot sucks, there isn't much for me to enjoy. The third thing is where Chima's review is very much important, and that is the Muslim representation in this book. I felt extremely uncomfortable reading about our main Muslim character. There's kind of three main characters, and one of them is a devout Muslim. He is the only Muslim character in this Middle Eastern fantasy. And that isn't to say that Middle Eastern people are only Muslim or that is their entire identity. That isn't what I'm saying, but you would think that you would get more of that representation in a fantasy because Middle Eastern fantasies is not as prevalent as, say, European fantasies. So you would think that you would want to widen the scope of representation even more. That being said, even though he is the only Muslim in this book, just the way in which S.A. Chakraborty decided to write his character made me extremely uncomfortable because he, like everybody else, was extremely racist and extremely bigoted, and that is just a prominent stereotype in the Western world, is that Muslims are intolerant to other cultures, and I understand that it fits because everybody else was that way, so why would a religious person be any different just because of their religion when there are religious people who are like that? It just rubbed me the wrong way because this was the chance for an Own Voices reviewer to paint a light into how the majority of Muslims think and believe and treat people. He was also constantly judging people for not having the same beliefs as him, which is another stereotype of religious people in general that I absolutely hated because that's one of my pet peeves. This would have been a great opportunity to dismantle some of those stereotypes, and I feel like it kind of just reinforced them. Despite me not enjoying this book really at all, I will say that the writing is absolutely stunning. The descriptions of the food and the atmosphere and the setting was so amazing, and for that I am very much willing to pick up anything that S.A. Chakraborty writes in the future. I believe that she's writing a Sinbad retelling, which I am so extremely excited for, but this book in particular just did not work for me. The next book I have to talk about is one that I actually have still, and that is Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. I still have not unhauled this because I'm lazy, but this one I actually have a rant review for, so I will link that up in the cards for you to go check out. This is a new adult book about our main character, Kath, who is a first-year college student, and she's an extreme introvert. She spends most of her time writing fan fiction for this Harry Potter-esque story, and she's just trying to navigate college as an introvert and as an extremely shy individual. I actually liked this during the first half. I actually really liked this during the first half. I understood how this is such a favorite for people because of how relatable Kath is, but I feel that the bane of this book was first how long it was, and second, how Kath treated college. I will say that looking back on my rant review and looking back on how angry I was reading this, it is very petty because it's not that big of a deal, but just the way in which Kath treated her schoolwork and treated her writing professor and all that entire plot, which is a plot of this book, because Kath was so resistant to actually making any effort whatsoever in her writing, which she clearly loves, and the amount of chances her professor gave her and the amount of opportunities that she didn't take advantage of, that she just scoffed at and didn't put any effort in, it just made me so irritated because it just reeked of privilege to me. Like I said, the first half was so fun, but once we got into the actual conflicts in here, I did not like, firstly, what the conflicts were based off of, and secondly, how the conflicts played out. It really took me out of the story and ruined a really wholesome book for me. Now at number 4, we have And I Darken by Kiersten White. I really wish I wrote a review for this so I could give all of my points on a thoroughly MLA formatted essay, because wow, this book. This is where my disclaimer comes into play because, oh my god, this book made me so incredibly mad. This is a Vlad the Impaler retelling, but it is told through a female main character. I knew going into this book that a lot of the criticisms for it were that it was extremely slow and boring. If I could just slam giant caps over this book that just says boring, please do not underestimate the power of that word. The reason why I think this book is so boring is the first half is when the main character and her brother and the Ottoman prince are all growing up. So they're children. I never want to follow a child. Unless it's a middle grade series, then sure, I consciously made that decision. But in a YA book, I do not want to follow any bratty ass, snot-nosed little child. I don't care. Skim through it, make it a flashback, do something, but don't have the first half of your book following them. I do not care, I promise you. But the thing that made me so mad about this book was how misogynistic this book is. I don't think I've ever read a more misogynistic book that is aimed to teenage girls. Lotta is the most anti-feminist character I could ever read about. She constantly degrades every single woman that comes on the page. She constantly talks about how she is better than women and she needs to be a man to get what she wants, and she is the better woman because she has man-like qualities and she has the strength and the mind of a man. And yet she acts like a lot of the women that she degrades because she falls in love with the Ottoman prince. But she's, again, better than all of those other females because she knows him, and she's the better partner because she, again, thinks like a man. So it's fine that she acts on her feminine whims and her feminine desires. But if another woman does that, she's garbage, she's worthless, and she's trash. So not only is this book extremely boring, but it's extremely misogynistic, and I really can't see why people enjoy it as much as they do. I know that a lot of people like, and I'm looking at you, Julia, because I know you like this book, even though I just trashed you like 2 seconds ago. I know a lot of people like Radu, which is Lada's twin brother, and he is nice. He's a great character, but I still don't like him enough to continue the series because he's still a side character. I mean, you could argue that he's a main character, but this is centered around Lada. Some people have said that she does go through character development in the trilogy, but her actions in this book just completely ruined everything for me, and I could not imagine going on and watching her grow, even if that supposedly happened. I am very surprised that it got published considering the messages in this book. Speaking of surprised it got published, Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin. This one was another extremely disappointing read for me because I was so ready to fall in love with this book. I mean, this cover, it does everything for me, and I loved it, and I wanted to love it so much so I could buy it and have it on my shelves, but I could never imagine tainting my shelves that way. Firstly, the writing in this book was atrocious. It's like the author just pushed you into open water and just left you kind of swimming along and basically drowning. You just kind of have to piece it together on your own, and the author is not skilled enough in writing or giving you clues or giving you anything. I was confused the whole time. I didn't know what the hell was happening. I didn't know what this world was. Is it 18th century France? Is it a completely different world? And if it is a completely different world, why are they still speaking French? Why do they still have French food? Why is the Catholic Church here? So is it 18th century France? And if it is, then why are they acting this way? What is happening right now? I have no idea what's going on. Neither does probably anybody because most people read it for the terrible romance. The author didn't do transitions very well, which made the writing extremely sloppy and choppy. Didn't make for a cohesive story. Everything was extremely convenient. So for example, they would be traveling to a place where they didn't know where it was, but then they would run into people that could point them exactly where they needed to go. I think my absolute biggest gripe with this book is the romance, because I knew going into this that this was mainly a fantasy romance. So even though the plot and the setting and the writing, all of that I didn't enjoy, I would have been able to forgive it if the main purpose for the book was great or even decent, but it wasn't. Again, keep in mind the disclaimer. Can I just put up a flashing lights of the disclaimer so I can remind people to remember what I said at the beginning of this video? The amount of hype I see this romance get and this love interest get is alarming to me because of how disgusting he is. Our main character is a witch hunter. This is a romance between a witch and a witch hunter. I never established that, but there you go. He is extremely bigoted towards witches, which, I mean, yeah, it makes sense. But he constantly refers to witches as it's subhuman, not deserving of life whatsoever. And not only that, but in general, he's extremely misogynistic towards women. Every single time our main character, which granted, I thought she was pretty annoying too, but that's besides the point. Every single time our main character looked remotely happy about something or had anything to say whatsoever, the main character would immediately knock her down and tell her that she wasn't in the right mind, or why did you enjoy that? Why do you like that? When our main character takes the love interest to her little apartment, he is literally like, this isn't your place anymore. You live with me. This is horrible. This is trash. This looks disgusting. And at that point, they have an established relationship and they like love each other now. But because there's a couple moments where he brushes her hair and he gives her a book, we're supposed to love him and forgive him for the constant verbal abuse that he gives the main character. I just still see so much fan art of these characters, and I must have read the different book. I must be way more critical of men. This guy is horrible, and I just could not imagine shipping them at all. Now, at the number 2 spot, I would say is quite an objective spot, and that is The Girl the Sea Gave Back by Adrienne Young. This is another one I received as an ARC, and this doesn't even have to do with the content. This strictly has to do with the structure and how bare bone it was. This is supposedly a companion novel to A Sky in the Deep, and I've heard pretty average things about that book. I went into this being like, okay, so her debut caught an average like 3 to 4 star rating, so this one's probably going to be great. It is Viking inspired. It has the sea aesthetic that I really love, so I was excited for this. This was one of my most anticipated reads of the year. I got into this book and I was so confused. This author, again, just threw you into open water. I never got answers. With Serpent and Dove, I was thrown into open water, but the story was so predictable and cliche that I was able to grasp at straws and kind of understand what was going on. For this one, no idea. And I'm not sure if that's my fault, where I should have read Sky in the Deep so I understood the basis of this world and the relationship between the clans and how the magic kind of worked. But it was marketed as a companion, and honestly, I didn't even know it was a companion until I went to go write a review. So I don't know if this was marketed wrong, if I needed to read Sky in the Deep in order to read this, but I was completely confused the entire time. And another thing which I don't like at all is this was written in first person dual perspective, and I find that if you are not able to distinguish the voices of the different characters enough, they can get lost. I was constantly having to flip back and remember whose chapter I was even reading because they sounded the same. They didn't have distinct personalities. Maybe if it was refined more, if it took more time and maybe developed more and gave more information, I don't know. But yeah, this was a complete failure for me, and it just did not work on a structural basis. So for that, I had to give it 1 star, and it has to be on my worst of the year list. And now my number 1 worst book of the year is going to be no surprise to anybody, and that is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This is where I discovered that I needed to refilm this video because I was just bashing all of the comments and responding to all of the idiotic comments that I got on my rant review for this rather than discussing why this is here. And I didn't want to do that because, first of all of those comments I think have been deleted by YouTube now with their new comment guidelines, because I was trying to look because I was going to respond to 1 or 2, but I don't think they're there anymore, so that doesn't matter anymore. And 2, I don't need to give them any attention, so that's kind of pointless. The Secret History is an extremely popular novel. It is about this group of classicists who end up murdering one member amongst them, and the first half is leading up to the murder, and then the murder happens, and the second half of the book is a display of privilege and descent into madness after escaping a murder and getting away with it. I found that I felt nothing when reading this, and at the beginning of the video I mentioned that I just feel things when I read something. That's why I'm so passionate about the books I love, why I'm so passionate about the books I hate. And this one did the exact opposite. I didn't feel anything, and that is where my frustration came, is because I felt nothing and I had to read this absolute tome of a book and trug through Donna Tartt's writing style. I found myself hating it more and more and more and more because I did not see why people loved this book and why every single person that reads this book gives this 5 stars. I mentioned in that review, and please go watch that review because I'll be way more succinct, even though someone said it was just a blabbering mess, which, I mean, this book was a blabbering mess. And since posting my review, which is my most viewed video on my channel and most disliked video on my channel, a few people have taken the time to talk about and discuss why they love this book so much. And the common consensus seems to be that this book shows a negative view of humanity and how terrible people get away with a terrible event, and also how they get what they deserve. And I find that they didn't get what they deserve. They got away with murder, and sure, they had shitty lives, but they were still rich and powerful and in powerful positions, and they were just sad, which, okay, I find that I just don't understand the appeal for this book. I don't think Donna Tartt did anything revolutionary with what she did. I think she just reinforced the patriarchy that existed in the culture with which she's trying to uphold in this book, and I think that's the closest thing that it even resembles a Greek tragedy in any sense, and that to me doesn't deserve praise in my opinion. I don't think we need any more of those stories, and I don't think those stories do anything to contribute to literature, despite many people disagreeing with me and saying that I'm simply not smart enough to understand the impact of this book. If you want to believe that, I can't change your mind, but I would also look to maybe reading actual Greek tragedies and the source of them, because they are much more fulfilling than this book will ever be. I don't think I'm going to be picking up literary fiction in the future because I don't want to expose myself to a genre that I'm not a fan of, and I don't want to expose myself to people that don't want to have a friendly and open discussion and would rather constantly criticize someone for giving any valid critiques of a book that they uphold as the word of God. On a extremely positive note, that is going to do it for this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video and aren't too mad at me. Don't be mad at me, please. I need validation and constant praise. Love me and appreciate me and give a like on this video because I know I'm going to get a lot of dislikes, and it also helps with my channel. I mean, dislike this video too. That again helps with my channel. So it really doesn't matter if you liked or disliked this video, as long as you do something and get my engagement up. Thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye!